Hi everyone. In today's lecture, we're going to be focusing on infant and toddler social and emotional development, so stay tuned. There are a few videos in addition to the lecture icons throughout, so I highly recommend that you take a peek at those to support your learning as we're moving through this lecture. All right, so to begin, let's talk a little bit about early emotions. So on this slide, as well as slide 3 and 4, you'll see additional information related to ages when emotions emerge and also the state of arousal that a child might be in related to a specific aspect of their emotions. So we do see that infants and toddlers have high emotional responsiveness, and really we're seeing that they rely on their parents and caregivers to support their emotional responses to the stimuli in their world. We also see that very young children, specifically children 0 to 3, are more right brain dominant. So they're more in tune and focused on their emotional responses, as well as developing various emotions throughout this time period. And so they're trying to figure out what those emotions mean, how they can respond to their environment, which kinds of emotions are appropriate. And so they are not as much in use of their left brain in terms of their verbal reasoning skills, as well as their ability to think logically. So when something spooks them or something excites them, they are stronger driven by their emotions as opposed to their ability to communicate and logically think about the next steps and how to solve how they are feeling in that moment. So like I said, make sure to check out also on slide 3 and 4 the different stages of when emotions emerge. So at 6 weeks, we see that a social smile is typically evoked by viewing human faces. We see that around 3 to 4 months, children are often presented with the emotion of laughter, and this comes when they're associated with a curiosity about a person or a place or something new in their environment. And we do see that fear is one of the strongest emotions that is present starting around 9 months, and this does happen due to the presence of strangers or separation from their primary caregiver. And then this does continue on throughout their lives in terms of when unexpected sights or sounds appear. And again, making sure that we're checking out slide 4 for all of the areas of the brain and what regions are supportive of the different states of emotions. So we do see that in our neocortex and subcortex, for example, this is more of a state of calm, whereas if we were looking into the arousal for fear, we do see that that comes from the midbrain and the brainstem. On this slide, I just wanted to share a little bit of information related to toddlers' emotions. So the chart does show up to about a year and a half. However, when we're considering a year to 2 years and 2 years to 3 years, we have some different kinds of emotional elements that are presented. So we do see that toddlers start to step into emotions related to pride, shame, embarrassment, disgust, and guilt. So we may want to tap more into those elements when we are considering what children are experiencing within their day-to-day environment. So for example, this is around the time when children are beginning to want to be more independent. This is also around the time when we start to do potty learning with our toddlers, and so there could be some embarrassment or shame related to those new movements of independence in their environment. We do see that anger and fear become less frequent and more focused, and so there are specific events or people or instances within a toddler's day-to-day that could cause them to be angry or fearful. So for example, if a child's toy is taken away from them, this can be more localized into why they're feeling angry, and so we can identify and help the toddler to regulate their emotions. We do see, however, that temper tantrums may appear during this time, and so remember that our infants and toddlers are more right brain focused, and so they are driven by those emotions, and they need support from their caregivers and their adults in their lives in order to have more of a verbal and logical explanation. We also do see that this is the beginning stages of when language development is happening. And so being able to address how I'm feeling, if I'm feeling angry, by identifying that feeling with a verbal response is something that I'm also developing at the same time that this anger and fear are becoming strongly present. And so considering the development of language as well as emotions at the same time, this can better support when you are giving different kinds of strategies to your toddler on how to manage and regulate their emotions. We do also see that by age 2, most toddlers have a wide range of emotions, and they do have some abilities in regulating how they react to different situations. But again, this does come from their adults and their caregivers and how they respond. So considering that if a child is feeling overwhelmed, trying to identify the why reason behind that, letting them know kind of what's going on within their environment, helping them to localize what they might be feeling in that moment, giving them a variety of different ways that they could respond appropriately. On this slide, there's a little bit of information related to the development of sense of self. So when thinking about one's sense of self, this is when we have an understanding that we are an individual person whose mind, body, and actions are separate from those of other people. So this comes into play when I'm thinking about the kinds of abilities that I have, the kinds of tasks that I can accomplish, the different kinds of capabilities that I am able to do within my life are that separate of someone else. And so we don't start to see the development of sense of self until around 15 to 18 months. And so again, this is related to different kinds of behaviors, different kinds of roles, different kinds of things that we are doing, our self-esteem, self-worth, our identity, who we are as an individual, and who we are as in someone that's separate than our family members. And so before 15 to 18 months, children aren't able to recognize yet that they are their own person, and the sense of self is going to continue to develop all the way until adolescence. But the beginning stages of this start around 15 to 18 months. And one way that we can look at this study of sense of self is by examining children using a mirror. And so if you click on the video on this page, you'll see that it's the Rouge test, which is a self-recognition test. And children younger than 12 months, so children a year younger, are not able to recognize that the mark that was put on their noses and foreheads is a separate entity from them, and they don't recognize that this is different than how they already see themselves. And so the rouge is just, a little bit of blush or lipstick that's put on to indicate that there is something different about the child. But until around 15 to 18 months, children don't start to see this curiosity, and they don't start to touch and examine their noses and recognize that, hey, that's not how I look typically. That's something different on me. And so at 15 to 18 months, we see this emergence of the me self. So noticing of distinct features, such as our nose, our eyes, distinct colors and shapes, being able to identify that I look different than someone else. Hence the reason why that we can use the mirror, so a child is able to distinguish who they are as an individual, as a separate entity from someone else. When thinking about infants and toddlers' social and emotional responses to the world, it's important to consider their temperament. So a person's temperament is their personality traits that determine how they respond to the environment. And so this is our mood or our disposition. And so we do see that there are different types of needs for caregiving dependent on the kind of temperament a child displays. And so this is often termed as a goodness of fit. And so we see that on the temperament styles, there are different ones that children fall into categorically. So easy, difficult, or slow to warm. And majority of children, about 40%, do fall within an easy category. So they have high persistence, their mood is typically positive, they're able to adapt to changes in their environment easily, and things like that. However, we do see that some children have a more difficult or slow to warm temperament, and this could be due to their intensity levels. So they might have high intensity, they might be highly sensitive when something changes, so maybe the feeling of their clothing they could be sensitive to. They may have difficulty when others approach them who they do not know, or adaptability. So if they're presented with a new stimuli or new environment, they might be less likely to be able to adapt to that. So if you look at the infant toddler temperament tool, you'll see that there are different measures on there, as well as if you look on the next slide of the 9 temperamental qualities, it goes into a bit more detail on what these temperamental qualities are. And I highly recommend taking a peek at this tool and filling it out. Now, it does have 2 sections. You could click for the infant section, and then you could click for the toddler section. And basically it just shows you a way to measure goodness of fit and how you might support your child. So for example, if I was looking at the category of activity level, if I have a highly active child and I am less active, I would click those 2 boxes, and then it would be able to give me some different kinds of strategies and tips in order to support the child who I am working with. Again, this could be you and your own child. This could be a child that you are working with in a child care center. Gives you different suggestions, which can be a great opportunity to figure out how to meet the child's needs. Again, if we're seeing that there is a disconnect between the temperaments and we are not thinking about how to best support the child, we may see that there are some clashing areas of engagement, so it might be more difficult for us to support the child in peer conflicts or during nap time or feeding time. On this slide, you'll see the 9 temperamental qualities that we were discussing previously. If you wanted to, again, look at the goodness of fit between a child and your own temperament, I would again recommend looking at the infant and toddler temperament tool on the previous slide. But I do want you to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the differences between each of these temperamental qualities. So if I was to present you with a question related to approachability versus adaptability, you would understand that approachability is how children are within different kinds of group settings. If they are approachable, if they're more likely to withdraw when presented with a new person or place. Same with adaptability. How do they actually adapt to new kinds of situations? So if they were put into childcare, how do they transition to and from being dropped off? Activity level. When we're engaging in different kinds of activities, do we see that children are highly engaged or not as much engaged? Now, this is a little bit different than persistence. So persistence is how long a child will engage and how much focus and attention they can have on one given activity, whereas activity level is if they are having more strong emotions connected to excitement, or if they are more calm during that time of the activity. We also see distractibility. So do children get easily distracted if they are playing with a puzzle or a shape sorter, for example, and there's an airplane that flies over when they are working on this activity? Are they likely to get distracted by that noise, or are they able to continue to engage in the activity without any distractions? How are children when they are presented with different kinds of stimuli related to their senses, so their sensitivity to light, clothing, temperature, things that they might be touching, their overall mood? So if we are presented with a child who might be more irritable, or maybe they're more easily triggered when we are using loud noises, this could persist to their general mood. We also see that the regularity of a child, so their biorhythms of how they sleep and when they're hungry, when they cry, those kinds of things. So just making sure that you have an understanding of the differences between these qualities. During birth through 3 years old, we see that this is a critical period for young children to have a consistent, sensitive, warm, and responsive caregiver interaction and attachment. And attachment is an inborn, lifelong motivation of humans to create strong affectional bonds with one another. So we see that through attachment theory by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, they determined that in order to best meet a child's needs, we need to consider how are we connecting with them socially? How are we responding to them emotionally? This also comes into play when we consider sensitive attunement. So when we're sensitively attuned to a child, we are better able to recognize the emotional states that they are in. And sensitive attunement and attachment is not just during 0 to 3, but it is lifelong again. So considering all of those different elements of arousal that we were looking at earlier, calmness, alarming, fear, and how are we recognizing those different states of arousal as well as those different emotions that might be occurring, and how do we respond to those? So when an infant cries, what emotional state might they be in, and what do they need during that time? So both physically and emotionally, what are they telling us through this cry? Is this a cry of hunger? Is this a cry of needing to have their diaper change? Is this a cry of I need more comfort? What are these signals trying to tell us? So in this state of being where this child is at, what do I need to do to support this child? How am I being sensitive to their reactions and responses to their environment? We also need to consider the child's temperament. So the way that they interact and respond to their environment does then determine how I should appropriately respond. And sensitive attunement is not just me being responsive and saying, okay, you were crying, I'm going to grab your bottle, here it is. I am also including strong connections socially and emotionally. So my face-to-face interactions, the way that I'm gazing at you, the cuddling that we might be having, our eye contact, smiling, kissing, singing, laughter, the time and attention that I spend, so how much energy I'm giving to you in this moment, that bond that we're creating. We also recognize this element of being in sync. And so synchrony occurs when there is coordinated, rapid, and smooth exchanges of responses between a caregiver and an infant. So when a child is crying, the way that I respond comes with the element of recognizing that the child needs to feel understood. They need to feel that someone is supportive of them. They need to feel that their state of being is validated, that they are important in that moment, that there is recognition and identification of their feelings and emotions. So whether the child is able to communicate this on their own or not, I'm still there as the caregiver to recognize, I hear that you're feeling upset right now, my friend. You're telling me through your body language and your cries. I'm here to support you. This also in turn supports a child's sense of self, development of self-esteem, development of emotional closeness to their caregiver, which is all important for development of social and emotional skills all over. In addition to how we support children through our synchrony, we also want to recognize there's social referencing. And so social referencing occurs when children are seeking emotional responses or information from other people. And so they're looking to you as the caregiver for how to respond within their social environment. So, for example, if you are walking along and pushing your child in a stroller and something scares them or startles them, how do you respond to that aspect of the new stimuli being present? And then how is the child supposed to respond? So if the child is easily frightened and you remind them, hey, it was just a dog that went by. Remember, we have a doggy at home. I know that was a little bit scary when you heard that loud noise. We're going to keep on moving on our walk, and we may see some other doggies, but don't worry, you're safe. I'm here. I got you. Everything's going to be okay. I can hold your hand if you need me. So considering how we're going to help children to socialize with the world around them and different kinds of expressions that they may see and reactions that they may take in from viewing how we respond to the world. So how we perceive different kinds of stimuli will be supportive of how the child will respond. So if we are easily frightened and afraid and start to yell and scream, this will then increase the child's likelihood to yell and scream and be afraid. Whereas if I was to remain calm and I am to state factual information and to help the child to find a way of appropriately coping with that, then they're better able to regulate and manage their emotions in the future when that same stimuli is presented to them and they don't have you there, for example. So if they were at childcare or with a different primary caregiver and the same dog came by, they would be better able to respond to that because they have different practice with how to engage with that stimuli in their environment. And so again, I've included that synchrony, attachment. These are important within how we engage with one another, and considering different kinds of vocalizations, expressions, gestures that we convey, and how they increase our child's ability to engage with their social world. One significant piece of research that we have to better understand attachment is Mary Ainsworth's strange situation experiment. I have included a video here to show you what that looks like. I would highly recommend checking it out to better support our lecture material here. I also have included different patterns of attachment on the next slide to indicate what the experiment is going more into detail on. So Mary Ainsworth looked at children 9 to 18 months old and also their connection between their primary caregiver to determine what kinds of attachment styles were present when a parent was not interacting while a child was exploring, when a stranger entered the room and talked to the parents and approached the child, and then finally when the parent left the child alone with the stranger. And then at the very end of the experiment, the parent re-entered the room and greeted the child. So they were looking at the kinds of interactions that the child had when they were in the playroom, and if they were exploring on their own, if they were exploring when the parent left, and then when the parent returned, how they responded. And so you'll see that there are different patterns of attachment, of secure attachment, insecure or avoidant, insecure or resistant, also known as ambivalent, or disorganized. And so on the next slide, it goes into a bit more detail on what that looks like. So please make sure that you check that out so that you have an understanding of how the child would respond. So for example, when we're looking at a child who has a secure attachment, we see that the child is able to play happily and eagerly. They are comfortable with exploring in the environment, and they are still able to continue to play even when the parent leaves, because they do have a strong attachment and they're excited when the parent comes back. However, for a child who has a disorganized attachment, they're a little bit more cautious when the parent is in the room with them because it's a new place, and also especially when the stranger enters the room, and when the parent does leave, the child is more confused, may present aspects of yelling or staring intently, as well as being scared, and then they are a bit more confused and may be upset when the parent does return. Now, the key features of secure attachment are what we want to strive for when thinking about a strong, appropriate, and well-rounded attachment caregiving style. However, we do see that there are many elements that could impact a secure attachment between a child and a caregiver, and those are things that we have to consider that may be a reason as to why a child is not able to eagerly explore, why they may have difficulty when the parent leaves. So again, please check out this video for more information, as well as look at slide 11 for the patterns of attachment. The internal working model is the understanding of the first primary relationship that we have, typically with the mother. However, this could be with any primary caregiver within our lives. This relationship sets us up for the biological and emotional template that we kind of have set in stone for future relationships. And so this is our understanding of perceptions and expectations of what we should be striving for and expect for different kinds of emotional relationships and connections that we're going to have. So future friendships, future relationships with a primary caregiver, future romantic relationships, all the way into adolescence and adulthood. And so this internal working model serves as how we will relate to other people, what kinds of expectations we have for how individuals will react with us, as well as how we will trust or do not trust others, how we perceive love and how we give love, what kinds of elements of care we value as well as expect, and the kinds of attention that we desire from others. And so this kind of relationship that we have can be dependent on the different elements within our environment, what kinds of relationships our primary caregivers have with their family members or their primary caregivers. This also can be different depending on different cultural aspects about relationships and those expectations. And so it is important for us to consider this internal working model before we take a look into those different kinds of attachment styles. So how children will regulate themselves when they have a strong attachment. How will they engage with others when there is a conflict? What happens if they're rejected? What kinds of engagement might they have to cope during that time? Will they be more likely to be anxious or codependent on someone? Will there be an increase in attentional difficulties related to school or when somebody is giving them advice? So all different kinds of responses dependent on the primary caregiver's behaviors and characteristics towards a child will then in turn move into how the child interacts with others in different kinds of relationships in the future.